Welcome to this Action for Happiness event on happy brain habits. And I'm absolutely delighted to be welcoming so many thousands of you here this evening again. Well, in fact, whatever time of day it is with you around the world, and delighted particularly to be joined by Professor Loretta Breuning this evening. Hi, lovely to see you.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I'm really excited about our conversation this evening. I've been following your work and think this is an area that's so timely and important for all of us that care about promoting well-being. We hear so much about some of the kind of brain chemicals and activities associated with how we function as humans, but I think many of us, myself included, don't really understand them. So I'm really excited to be sharing your great work with the community this evening. Thank you also to everyone who's joined already this evening. I can see many hundreds more still coming in. Loretta and I will be having a conversation about this evening's theme. She's got huge amounts of wisdom to share with us, but also, as well as sort of some of the science, we'll be looking at what that means for us practically in our own lives, and a chance for us to reflect a little bit and share some ideas together in the chat as always. So it's lovely to have those of you who are sharing things already and welcoming each other on the chat. That's great. Let's please try and keep that respectful and kind as always, and focused on the topic at hand, and really looking forward to seeing your feedback during this event. We also have the Q&A function, and please feel free to post any questions you have in the Q&A. We won't have time for all of them, but I know Loretta's very happy to answer various things that come up. And there's also the ability to vote on other people's questions to help them raise higher up the list. So if you like the look of another question that's been asked, please do vote them up. But let's get straight into the topic at hand. Loretta, it's wonderful to have you with us. And I thought I might start by just asking you to frame this whole area for us, really. You founded this Inner Mammal Institute. You do a huge amount of work on what happens in our brains, but also how it links to our evolution, I guess, as a species. Maybe you could sort of frame why this is so important.
Sure. Well, I had followed psychology my whole life. And then when I stumbled on the fact that animals have the same brain chemicals we have, I was stunned. I was like, how come I haven't heard this? And then when I heard what these chemicals do in animals, I couldn't believe it, because this is what people do. So it's so valuable to understand the job that our brain chemicals evolved to do, because then you could sort of be more accepting about your own responses and the responses of other people.
Wonderful. So that similarity, I guess, between our ancestors and animals and ourselves and modern life, that might seem rather distant, but I hope we're going to find some really enlightening things that this means for us. And as you say, this is about understanding ourselves better so we can perhaps make wider choices in our lives. I've heard you sort of talk about there being four main brain chemicals, all of which I'd heard of, but I wouldn't profess to necessarily know that much about exactly how they work. Would you like to maybe summarize the ones that you think are most important that we can then maybe go through in a bit more detail?
Sure. And the way I explain them is from the perspective of evolutionary psychology, but it's from my reading of the research. It's not what academics in that field say. But the important thing is it's sort of divorced from the medical perspective, which gives us the impression that we're just supposed to have these chemicals flowing all the time for no reason. And then if we don't, it's a disease. So it's so useful to know that in animals, they're not designed to flow all the time. They're designed to reward specific survival behaviors. So dopamine rewards you for taking action toward a resource that meets a need. Serotonin, oxytocin rewards you for finding safety in social support. Serotonin rewards you for getting the respect of others, which gives you more access to what we biologists call reproductive success. And endorphin gives you a euphoria that masks pain, which allows you to escape from real physical pain for a few minutes.
Mm. So that all makes intuitive sense, and I recognize those names and indeed the characteristics associated with them. I'd love to go into each of those in more detail to understand it and think about what that means in our lives. But I think there's a more fundamental point here that you've already hinted at, which is these things are in many ways trying to help us meet our needs, both sort of physical and I guess social as well. Is that the fundamental reason that we have these chemicals?
Yes, and our brain is always focused on the unmet need. So in the state of nature, you had to look for food constantly. So you also had social needs, but you had to find food and water and firewood, so you couldn't obsess over social needs. But when your physical needs are met easily, you have all of nature's energy and nature's alarm system to focus on social minutia.
Yeah, right. So you mentioned dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphin. So I'd love to maybe spend a bit of time exploring each of those in detail. So let's start with dopamine, which I guess is a sort of, is that the classic happy high that we might get when we do pleasurable activities?
Yes, but each individual has a different idea of what's pleasurable. And frankly, in the first chapter of my book, I talk about love. If that, if anybody's thinking of love, that's all four chemicals. So, there's very specific. So dopamine is the expectation of a reward. And how do you know when you're going to get a reward? If you're a monkey waking up in the morning and you're hungry and you don't have a refrigerator, you look around for food. And when you see something that you think you can get, dopamine turns on, and that makes you feel good, excited, and it releases energy that makes you go toward it. When a lion sees a gazelle that it thinks it can catch, dopamine turns on and you go toward it. So we are always looking around for something that meets our needs, defining our needs with neural pathways based on whatever triggered your dopamine in your past and whatever need is unmet at this point. And that's what gets you excited.
Interesting. So what we talk about this idea of a sort of hedonic treadmill sometimes, this idea that when you get something that you get a real sense of reward from, that then that sort of tails off after a while, and we keep searching for these little highs, sometimes in healthy ways, sometimes in unhealthy ways. What's going on there?
Great question. So there's two things. One is that dopamine stops as soon as you get what you seek. So when the monkey gets the fruit, the dopamine stops. It's not meant to be on all day. It's only like an information signal and an energy releaser. So, if you work for 10 years to become a doctor, then you get your medical degree. And then if you feel a little lack in dopamine, it's like there's nothing wrong with you. It's not depression. This is how it works. So that's one thing. But then the other thing is our expectation of reward is built by past experience. So what I expect to trigger my dopamine, what I expect to make me feel good is wired from my past. So when I was young, ice cream was like the classic reward. So I can't make myself happy by eating ice cream all day, every day, but my brain expects to be happy by eating ice cream.
So in some ways, our early experiences of what things bring that sense of joy can actually wire in expectations that may or may not be all that accurate or helpful, in fact. So is it worth being sort of a bit more aware of the things that bring us that boost and whether or not that's something we want to reinforce or perhaps look at differently?
Yes, exactly. And to know that everyone is in the same situation. You didn't get a bad brain, but everyone is wired by their past dopamine, and it's frustrating for everyone.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to come back in each of these when we go through them and talk about the so what of like what this might mean and how we put this into practice. But I wonder, maybe we could pause and do a quick sort of community reflection here on dopamine. You said we've all had these different triggers in our past. Maybe we could ask a question to the community and get people to share a few things in the chat that are personal to them. How would you frame that for us?
Sure. Well, I'll give you an experience that happened to me. When I was young, I had a lot of bad things going on, let's say, around me. And then one good thing happened, which was my father got offered a free trip through his work. And my parents were people who never left home. And here they are getting on a plane going here, getting on a plane going there. And then the next year they took me. So my brain's definition of a reward is travel. So now frankly, I obsess over travel. And whenever I'm in a bad mood, I start researching my next trip. And so everyone can think about what excites you and then find the early experience that built that pathway to see, and then you have more control over it. Like I could say, do I really need to have another trip? Or is this just an old neural pathway and I can build a new pathway? So think about what excites you today and what would be like that early experience that built that dopamine pathway. And
Okay, so
if you
let's
want to
do this
share
now.
it,
I'm going to try and do this as well myself. And then if you can bring to mind something that is a pleasure for you now and where that may have come from in your past, and perhaps if you, again, if you feel willing to share that in the chat. I can see being given chocolate always made me feel loved as a child. Dating involves dopamine highs that people can get addicted to. Music, food,
food is always the big one.
yeah, sports, swimming, escaping into a book, alcohol, reading, seeing grandchildren, my mum's sponge cake, tennis, making other people laugh, cookies, love, concerts, avoiding pain, and the list is now flying past so fast I can't really even read it anymore. Yoga, risky behavior, that's an interesting one, painting, friends, bicycles, baking, animals, television, vodka, birds, shoes, hiking. What a lovely spread of the diversity of human experience. I mean, for one thing, that's making the point that what gives us these dopamine rewards is very varied across people, isn't it?
Yes, an interesting thing, someone mentioned seeing grandchildren. So needless to say, when you were in your young years of neuroplasticity, you didn't have grandchildren, but you learned it through your mirror neurons. Possibly you had a grandparent who enjoyed you and your company, and that wired you to have that positive expectation about that kind of interaction. So we're all bringing preconceptions about what's going to feel good and what's not going to feel good.
Mm. Well, we'll come back to dopamine a bit later on when we sort of review these again, but let's move on. You mentioned oxytocin, I think, next, didn't you? Which I tend to see in the media portrayed as the kind of cuddle hormone, the thing that's helping mothers to bond with their children and so on. Is that an accurate portrayal?
Yes, it is, but it's partial. So what I always explain in my book, and when I talk in the media now, they're saying oxytocin is from hugging and we should hug, and now we're deprived of hugging. But if you hug someone you don't trust, it doesn't feel good. It doesn't meet your need for social support. So it's fascinating to see that monkeys are very particular about whose fur they groom, because if I let you close enough to touch my fur, you could kill me in a split second. So trust comes before touch, and trust is what we're really looking for. And touch only feels good because it's activating an old oxytocin circuit that told me to trust you, but we're not designed to trust everyone all the time, because that would not be good for survival. So it's important to understand my old oxytocin pathways that are telling me when to let down my guard, when not to let down my guard, and then to know that I have power to build new pathways so I'm not limited or misdirected by those accidents of past experience.
Mm. And I think when we spoke about this the other day, as well as talking about trust, you talked about a sense of protection. I think that what we're to some extent looking for in our relationships is a feeling of being protected. Would you like to say a bit more about that?
Yes, so we often hear about social support as this altruistic thing, and maybe people are not good objective judges of their own altruism, but they think they're altruistic and therefore everyone should be altruistic toward me. And then they're disappointed and bitter. And so that just spreads bitterness. So a more realistic view is valuable. So animals are always looking for protection. And when you see a herd, you should know that all those animals are pushing toward the center of the herd where they're safer. They're trying to hide behind another critter so the other one gets killed. So I know it sounds crude of me to say this, and I thank David Attenborough for his sense of reality. And I'm not saying that we should be that way, but your inner mammal is doing that, and you've got to understand that. Otherwise, you're going to be disappointed with everyone. So you could say, my inner mammal is looking for protection. Your inner mammal is looking for protection. How can we be real and create a mutuality, a reciprocation, so that we both feel safe?
So it strikes me that the early years of our life are particularly important in this context. I feel eternally grateful for the fact that despite all the challenges of any life, I did grow up in a family environment where I felt very loved and safe and protected. But I can imagine for someone who's growing up in a more unstable environment or has a relationship with a caregiver where they don't feel protected, that might again sort of wire in I guess oxytocin seeking or different behaviors later in life. Is it true that sort of our early experiences in this area really affect how we relate to others later?
So our neuroplasticity peaks at age 2, and then it's high until age 8, and then it boosts again during adolescence. So the social interactions of those years create your expectations about when it's safe to lower your guard. However, we shouldn't think, oh, I had a bad childhood, so I got a bad brain, because in fact, my shock after studying, I was a parent, I was a teacher, and I studied animal training, is that the most protected children and students and animals are not necessarily the happiest, because you still have to learn to negotiate the adult world. And if you've always been protected and didn't build those skills yourself, then you have a sense of threat. So everyone has their challenges, and it's our challenge to understand our own wiring and accept that others have their own wiring.
This is fascinating. So dopamine was about sort of finding the things that meet our needs and getting a bit of pleasure from that. Oxytocin is really about this need to feel protected and sort of trusting connections. I can see some implications from both of those about what choices we might make. But I think before we start getting into the so what actions, I'd love to kind of complete the picture. So you mentioned serotonin index, again, another word you hear quite often in literature around whether it's antidepressants or drug use or other contexts. Could you say a bit more about serotonin for us?
Sure. So what I learned from studying animals and evolutionary biology, there was a whole century of research on the competitiveness of animals, the social hierarchy of mammals, and how much energy they invest in trying to rise within the herd, the troop, and how it rewards the survival of their genes. And natural selection built a brain that rewards you with serotonin when you manage to get a little one-up moment. Like, it's not an abstract conception, permanent, but it's just in this moment, I compare myself to you, and if I think I'm stronger than you, then I will reach for that banana. Serotonin gives me calm confidence in my ability to do that. If I feel smaller than you, then I will not reach for that banana, because in the animal world, you literally get bitten if you reach for a resource, and that includes mating opportunity, when a stronger individual is present. And that's why our brain is constantly comparing and having such strong reactions to the comparisons that we generate ourselves.
So in the world of well-being that many of us on this call are focused on, there's often a call, especially in the modern world of social media, to try and let go of comparisons to others, to try and be a bit more at peace with ourselves as we are. Very easy to say, very hard to do. And in fact, you're reminding us, I think, that this is natural, that we have a drive towards social comparison that isn't, unhealthy or healthy. It's just there. It's part of who we are. So knowing that is almost step one in deciding how we use that tendency, I guess.
Yes, and even more important, that if you don't accept that you're doing this yourself, you feel like the world is forcing it on you, and then you lose your power over it. Whereas when you realize, hey, I'm doing judging too, I'm complaining that they're judging, but I'm doing a lot of judging myself, you have power over your own judging. And also that it's wired by your past serotonin moments. So when I was young, if I hit a home run, then I thought, oh, wow, finally I'm getting recognition. Then your brain says, oh, you got to keep hitting home runs. That's the way to get rewards. And then maybe some people are obsessed with hitting another home run. Other people rebel and say, oh, I'm so frustrated. Why do I have to keep hitting home runs? But to know that we rely on past experience with serotonin, but if we understand it, we could broaden the quest.
This is great. So why don't we do another one of your interactive challenges then, as you say, looking backwards at things. So let me see if I've understood this right. So what is it in my past that might have given me a sense of social recognition, acceptance, hierarchy, that might then be still important to me now because of that feeling it created before? Is that what you're asking us to think about?
Yes, exactly. And I'm looking for it today, and I'm expecting that it will give me a sense of importance. And how did some early experience fit that same basic schema, of course, in a child version?
Well, again, it's always lovely to see responses in the community. So I'd invite you to share your own responses. In my own sense, something I had that I valued in my childhood was being told I'd done well. And so I've spent a lot of my life looking for people to say, thank you, well done, and to be sort of recognized in that sense. And it's made me sort of a people pleaser in an unhelpful way, and also perhaps feeling not happy with myself if I don't get that sort of external validation sometimes. So I think that's an example of that. People are saying good grades in school, being popular, good handwriting, spelling, exam results, dancing, feeling valued, money, of course, as a form of recognition, making art, being told my food tastes good, volunteering, being liked by others, of course, star performances, playing the violin, writing essays, making people laugh, thinking quickly, being good in front of an audience. Wow, this is resonating a lot, but again, a huge amount of variety of things that really, you can see are linked to our sense of acceptance within the group, aren't they?
Right, and they're not good or bad, because any of them can be overdone, but any of them can also be healthy. So that's why I always say we need a variety of rewards in our toolkit so that we don't overuse any one of them.
Mm. So it strikes me that in our society, we have ways of trying to show our social worth. That might be the brands that we wear or the things that we buy. And I've felt myself that like I reject some of the classic status symbols you might associate with wanting a fast car or having the latest stuff. That doesn't feel like me. And yet I think what you're probably saying is that there will be other ways that I have found to try and meet that same need. If it's not the Ferrari, it might be the modern, well, a new equivalent of that. Is that how do we, is this always there for us?
Yes, I have a new book coming out called Status Games, Why We Play and How to Stop. And I list 20 different status games. And people have always done this. And again, thank you, David Attenborough. The young monkeys have to eventually overthrow the higher up monkeys. Otherwise, they'll never get any mating opportunity and their genes will be wiped out. So every generation is always trying to overthrow the status hierarchy of a prior generation in order to feel it. And I have such a funny example that I experienced. I went to a conference in real life. There was a speaker on the stage who was wearing a tight black t-shirt that showed his muscles. After the talk he gave, ended up sitting next to him at lunch, and he was wearing like a gray flannel suit. So I think on the stage, he was wearing what was perceived as like the power, showing off your muscles is the power costume on the stage. And then when he was in the audience, he was trying to blend with the herd of what the audience was wearing.
Lovely example. And I can feel that I do that sort of wanting to fit in behavior in different contexts as well. And you're saying it's natural. So it's just about us really being aware that this is something that we're all doing ourselves, but also everyone around us is doing. And knowing that is definitely, really helping us live more wisely. Before we come back to some of the so whats and actions as a result of these, the fourth one you mentioned was endorphins, which I think of in the context of when I fall off my bicycle and hurt myself. The fact that like for the first 10 minutes or so, I've no idea whether I'm seriously injured or absolutely fine, because I get such a kind of rush that I may be completely unaware of how much pain and damage I've done myself. So presumably this is this a kind of basic part of our surviving when under danger response?
Yes, exactly. So if you watch a nature video and you see that a prey animal has a lion like with its teeth in and hanging off of it, and the prey animal is still able to run while its flesh is ripped open, because endorphin is the body's natural opioid. That's what the word means, endogenous morphine. And it masks pain for about 20 minutes, which allows an organism to take action to save its life by masking pain. And so when you fall and people say to you, "Are you okay?" you don't know, because endorphin is giving you a good feeling. And so many people have the strategy of chasing that good feeling, but it's really evolved. It's only triggered by real physical pain. It's not there to make you high.
But does that mean that some people who are fixated on the gym routine or looking to punish themselves with certain ways that do drive them to physical extremes are somehow chasing that endorphin response?
Yes, exactly. And the reason is it's an effective distractor. A distractor means that when I visualize a lion, my cortex can terrify my inner mammal as if the lion is really there, which gazelles can't do. A gazelle lives with lions all the time, but they're not terrorized because They only feel threatened when the lion is right there. So when I think about threats all the time, and then I have a way to distract myself, anything that worked in the past feels like a lifesaver. So many people have been taught that exercising to the point of pain is the way to happiness, but all it is one of thousands of potential distractors. And you don't have to inflict pain on yourself if you create another routine for distracting your mind and body together from a negative threatened thought, a thought that's generating negative chemistry.
And Loretta, is this also what's going on to some extent, at least, with self-harm, when people actually harm themselves physically because actually they're getting a bit of an endorphin response, which in the short term might mask something they're feeling, but actually isn't a very healthy response?
Yes, and the same with anorexia. Hunger triggers endorphin.
Interesting. Okay. Well, I feel like in a very short amount of time, you've taken us through these four really, really clearly and succinctly. So we've had dopamine, which is kind of helping us get a pleasure response from having needs met. We've had oxytocin, about feeling protected and in a trusting relationship. We've had serotonin, which is about, I guess, being a reward we get for feeling socially connected and part of a group. And then endorphins, about masking pain. My obvious question next, with my action for happiness hat on, is, so that's fascinating and intellectually stimulating, but what can we do about this in our lives? We are in many ways living unconsciously in response to our chemicals, can't necessarily control these things. Maybe we could go through each in turn and think about the so what. How would you like to suggest we do that?
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to do one at a time, but first it's good to mention that we have limited power over them. We can build new pathways. It only takes one step to trigger the chemical, but you're not going to get enough to have a high, but then you can take another step. So you can keep stimulating them with new steps. So the point is not about condemning your old self, but broadening your pathways.
Mm. So that's really helpful. Should we start with dopamine then? So what are the implications of this natural seeking of the short-term pleasure?
Well, many people go to the other extreme from the natural seeking of the short-term chemical, of having a long-term goal, but the goal is too far away. It would be as if a monkey saw a fruit that was a mile away and they knew they couldn't get it, because in order to get it, they'd have to leave their group and they'd be eaten by a predator. So if the goal is not far away, no dopamine is triggered. So if you think you're going to be a rock star, but you're not actually getting closer to being a rock star, your brain is not going to release it. So there's a middle path. So I suggest the to-do is always have a short run reward, a short run goal, a long run goal, and a middle term goal. So a lot of teachers, the teaching philosophy today is to suggest to kids, you're going to be a rock star, you're going to be a doctor, but it's too far away and people can't visualize the steps. So you have to always break your goals down into smaller chunks that you believe you can take, because you have to believe and take them in order to stimulate the dopamine, but only a small step is enough.
Well, this is music to my ears, because those in the Action for Happiness community will be familiar with our monthly themes and our daily actions, which are always small, doable steps you can take that bring a sort of positive sense of efficacy and impact on your own happiness or others. But actually, it's those little steps that add up and create that sense. And I guess when I do these little actions every day, whether it's stopping to meditate in the morning or notice things I'm grateful for, or reaching out to a friend and so on, I feel like I'm getting a little boost each time. And I wonder if it reminds me of the way that game designers build games these days, where they build, like, every minute when a child or anyone plays a game, they get a little reward from completing the level or achieving something. Or I guess lots of our society is designed now to give us these dopamine hits in marketing and in game design and so on, but we can also curate that in our own lives.
Yes, and we need to, because otherwise we're just going to be driven by whatever rewards are most accessible, which may not be the healthiest ones. And we can structure our own reward system. And I saw the words positive reinforcement that someone had written. We can structure our own positive reinforcements instead of just being run by other people's. And a simple example I use of that, We can't use food rewards endlessly, but if you have a brownie and you cut it into 4 pieces and you use 1/4 of it to reward yourself this afternoon for doing something challenging, and another quarter tonight, maybe for, just accepting that you did a good job today, and another quarter tomorrow, and another quarter tomorrow night, then you feel like you're getting rewards all the time. And that's what your inner mammal wants, rather than the idea that I have to suffer for the next 10 years and then suddenly I'll be a rock star.
Yes, it's a reminder that happiness is often in the journey, not the destination, isn't it? Yeah. Thank you. So let's move on to oxytocin. So you were talking about this need for trust and protection. We can't really change how other people behave towards us, but we can, I guess, control how we respond to others. What are the lessons from oxytocin and understanding it?
Yes, very good. That you can't control other people. So what can I control? So first, I can be honest about my own expectations, which is not very easy, because our expectations of others are built by these old pathways that are unconscious, because they were learned wordlessly when we were young. So I'm looking for an opportunity to lower my guard. Like a gazelle can lower its guard when it's surrounded by other gazelles, and then it can eat. That's what we're looking for. It's like, I feel safe because people are around me. So once you get real, you say, well, I don't really feel safe with this one. That's why, like, I'm working so hard to keep the relationship going, because it's not really meeting my oxytocin need to feel safe. So if once we're real, then we can design action steps. And sometimes I know there's too much of like getting rid of people. So we don't want to so how can I get positive trust? So small steps, which is I build half of the bridge toward you, but I can't control whether you will build half the bridge toward me. But if I build half the bridge toward a different person every day, then one day one person will reciprocate, and another day another person will reciprocate. And I'll have all these nice oxytocin rewards, but I can't predict or control them.
I like that a lot, and it reminds me of that quote: "The best way to have a friend is to be a friend." And actually, what you're saying is also true the other way around, which is we can be a bit more aware of the extent to which we're providing a sense of protection for our loved ones, our children, our parents, our colleagues, and actually recognizing how important a role we might be playing for somebody else, perhaps that we're not even aware of.
Exactly. Yes. And otherwise, we jump to negative conclusions about their behavior.
Okay, this is making sense. Thank you. So serotonin, I got the sense, was perhaps a little bit more of a tricky one, because it's recognizing something in ourselves that perhaps we might almost want to push away from, this idea that we're constantly comparing, and that's natural, even though we like to think that we're not doing that. What can we learn from serotonin and this desire for social acceptance?
So this is very tricky. Again, social acceptance is oxytocin. Social recognition is the serotonin. Sorry. It's sort of like a monkey wants to be included in the troop, but then it wants to rise in the troop. So being included is life or death, but then rising is life or death to its genes. So how can I rise in the troop without being like a maniac status seeker, without always being frustrated with like not getting the applause of the world, which we all know these patterns so well. I call them junk status in my books. And the unfortunate answer is that we have to give it to ourselves, which is unpleasant, because your inner mammal says, hey, everybody else is getting it. I want to be the center of the world, because so you have to keep reminding yourself, oh, that's right. I'm only one of 8 billion people who all want to be the center of the world. And yet to accept that it's natural to want that feeling. So as the way I made peace with this, I read a lot of biographies, and I see that everybody gets frustrated because they don't get support when they do something creative and something that they think is new and important, because it's important to you. It's not necessarily important to others. So you have to do it first before you get recognition. And to be honest about history, you're not going to get recognition for a decade or 2 or 3 or 4. And you may not be alive. So just give it to yourself now and just assume that it'll come later.
That's nice. And I think I like this phrase I heard you mention about sort of having a calm confidence, which is, I mean, is it possible, given what we know about our desire to rise up the hierarchy, to be able to say to us authentically, to ourselves, you're okay as you are? I mean, it's definitely a meme you see a lot, and a trope almost of like, just love yourself the way you are. And I found that I'm better able to do that now than I was. I'm less of I call myself a recovering people pleaser. Um, is it possible to sort of almost disconnect from that natural urge in a way that creates a bit more inner peace?
Yes, but it's challenging because you can probably think of examples of people who are not nice to others. And then if they love themselves the way they are, they're going to get a bad reaction from others and keep ending up with the conclusion that something is wrong with the world. So we all struggle to make sense of the world given our past wiring. But how can I do both? How can I feel okay with myself while still being open to improving myself? And that's a challenge. But this concept of calm confidence, I learned it from Cesar Millan, who does The Dog Whisperer. And he explained that the aggressive dog is sometimes the dog that feels threatened, and sometimes the dog that feels like too much of itself. So it's the middle position, and it's very challenging. In my book, I call it life in the middle lane. It's very challenging to be in the middle lane. So sometimes you want to be in the fast lane of I got it going on, and sometimes you want to be in the slow lane of like, I'm really not strong in this, I better pull back. And then each time pull back into the middle lane where you're flexibly taking in reality.
That's really wise. I want to get on to some brilliant questions we've already had posted in the Q&A, but just before we do, we haven't come back to the endorphins and the sort of the so what on endorphins. And you mentioned that it's in many ways chasing endorphins isn't very healthy because we're sort of using physical pain to correct that response, and that isn't particularly sustainable. Apart from recognizing that and trying to not do it, is there anything else about the sort of actions we can take in response?
Well, I was amazed to learn that laughing triggers endorphin. And the reason is it activates deep inner intrinsic muscles, which is breathing, belly muscles, that gives them a jolt. And you just get a little bit, but then you can laugh again when, get a little bit more. So it's a healthy way to stimulate endorphin. And what I think is funny is like hot pepper stimulate it, which is a great example of, well, that's not a solution because you can't just eat more and more hot peppers. So it's to know that these things are not meant to be on all the time. And if other people are like chasing some high, it's not what our brain is designed for.
It reminds me that there's a couple of other sort of chemicals we often hear talked about, perhaps in the sense of negative well-being, like cortisol as being linked to stress and so on. Is there anything that's important to note about that before we move on to some other questions?
Sure. Well, first to accept that we have this natural alarm system that we've inherited because our ancestors lived with like very extreme immediate threat. People today, they feel so threatened that they're really not aware of the degree of threat in the past. And I know like young people think that they live in the worst threat ever. And cortisol makes it feel like you're about to be killed immediately. That's immediate survival threat. And if I had a very safe early experience and then I didn't get invited to a party and that built a cortisol circuit, and that's the worst experience I ever had when I was 5 years old. So that's like my foundation, my core cortisol circuit. And then every time maybe I suspect that somebody had lunch without inviting me, that circuit is there getting triggered. That creates that as if my survival were threatened because we're so safe that nothing else is triggering it.
I see. So it's actually, even if the world around us is safer than it used to be, we still have just as visceral a kind of sense of a fear or fight or flight type response. So it's, again, worth being aware of what triggers that for us. In the case of that sort of cortisol thing where it is feeling like you're left out from the party and so on, is there anything in the world that we've just talked about with the kind of the more happiness linked chemicals that we can do to create, to calm that cortisol effect, if you like?
Yes, great. So I call this a self-soothing tool. So whenever you notice yourself having a cortisol response, First, to notice that it's happening and to notice, oh, this is a cortisol response. The world is not really having an urgent survival threat. I'm just reacting as if it did because of my cortisol pass. Second, do something fun for about a half hour, because that's how long it takes for your body to release the majority of the cortisol, not all of it, because as long as you have it in your system, it's telling you to look for bad stuff. And we're really good at looking for bad stuff. And then we end up in a cortisol loop where we just get more cortisol and look for more bad stuff. So do something fun. And when I say fun, I mean you have to like it. It can't be just good for yourself according to others. If you want to stop the cortisol, you have to actually like it. And then step 3 is to set a timer, spend 1 minute planning your next step toward meeting an unmet need, and then take the step.
This is great. So following on that theme of practical suggestions, are there any other sort of top tips that come to mind for you in this whole world of understanding our brain chemistry that we haven't already talked about, or that you just want to re-emphasize? Because it feels like it's great for us to have some practical things we could take away.
Well, the whole awareness of being, comparing yourself to others is huge. And being aware that you're doing that all the time. We talked about that. Now, people have been, suddenly it's trendy of like having a dopamine fast, because people are blaming their device for triggering that. And I think it's, people maybe get addicted to that positive feedback, but there's another problem with your device. Maybe somebody got mad at you because you didn't reply to them quickly, and that's why you're reaching. So we are all wired individually. You can find what is your past wiring with your device and then manage that wiring instead of blaming the device.
That's very interesting. I've just seen a question pop up in the chat actually, rather than the Q&A, but I find it fascinating because it's something we haven't talked about yet. Barbara has asked, what is it, I guess she said it is released, I guess she means in terms of brain chemicals, with compassion. We've talked about oxytocin and feeling protected and so on, but a characteristic we're trying to nurture a lot in our community is compassion, caring about the well-being and happiness of others. How does that play into the different chemicals we talked about? I think I'm right in saying that there is an element of a dopamine hit that you can get when you help others as much as when you help yourself. Sometimes there's some evidence that you get a similar, the helper's high, for example, that we sometimes talk about with volunteering and so on. How does compassionate behavior link to some of these hormones?
So first, if it can be different for different individuals, but we have mirror neurons that we're evolved to learn from others. When you see others get a reward, you feel a reward. When you see others suffer pain, you feel pain. That's how monkeys teach their children without words, is every little monkey has to learn to feed itself, because when mom gets food, then the monkey reaches for food. So when you are rewarding others, your mirror neurons are reproducing that sense of reward. So there's a healthy aspect of that. And you already understand the healthy aspects. So if I may just quickly address some unhealthy aspects. Some people have the idea that I can't get rewards. Life is only about others, and it's never my turn. And they create a sense of bitterness. And then they think, well, if I give to others, others will give to me, but then others don't. And then they end up bitter. Or I always have to put myself last. So we want to balance. So compassion is good. But another thing, it may be used as a distractor, and this is a dopamine thing, is I'm feeling bad. How can I feel better? That's what we all need to do. How can I feel better? And if you only have one self-soothing tool to do something for others, then that's all you do. So then you get dopamine of like, well, I'm taking out my self-soothing tool. But then if you're always putting yourself last, you need more different self-soothing tools. And one more thing is, excuse me for saying, moral superiority is a status game. And many people today, I think it's the modern thing, like rather than having financial superiority, moral superiority is the modern status game. And you know what I'm talking about, so I'll stop there.
Yeah, interesting. And again, that's another reminder that lots of the good deeds we do does come to some extent from this desire to rise up the social pecking order, and that's a natural evolutionary tendency, and awareness of that is really important. Yeah. I
And
want
it's
to.
healthy in the sense that in the past, the way to rise up was to be a soldier. So, it's much better if you do it this way. But on the other hand, if you do it with bitterness and end up hating the world because how come I'm always last, then it's not working.
Be a happy philanthropist rather than a miserable one, is what you're saying. Yeah. So questions. Michael's asked, is there something we could say about sleep and insomnia and how that relates to brain activity?
Yes. So sleep is very important because that's when we manufacture our happy chemicals. And so if you don't get enough sleep, then the next day, even if you're having a good day, you don't feel it because the chemicals are not in the reserve pouch in the synapse to be released. But I wish I had a magic solution for insomnia. I know it's challenging. I don't have a simple solution, but I think self-acceptance is important. I think the other thing, so challenging. You wake up, the minute you wake up, where does your brain go? To the worst thing in your life. Like the worst thing that happened to you yesterday is where your brain goes when you wake up. So it's like, imagine you're a caveman, and when you wake up, you're like, okay, are there any predators? No. Okay, now I can leave my enclosure. And I had this experience where somebody sent me my book, and I got to look at the physical book on the first time. And I looked on the back, and they put my home address on the back cover. And I was sort of upset. Then I got over it. I talked myself out of it. Then I woke up in the middle of the night and they put my home address on the cover of me.
Yeah. Again, so just linking it back to how we would have been in that life or death survival situation is just a helpful awareness of what's going on, at least. I want to wrap the next two most popular questions together, because Andy's made a really good point we often hear made, in lots of the world of well-being. Even if we understand our brain chemicals, how is that going to help somebody, let's say, who has mental health challenges? It's like saying to somebody who's depressed, just be happy. It's not that straightforward. But then linked to that, someone who's called Champagne Connoisseur, fascinating username there, has also asked, are we able to rewire and retrain the brain? And I guess these two potentially related. So on one level, it's like, how does understanding this help in any way? But I guess if we are able to rewire and retrain, then maybe the answer is we can. So how would you respond to those two in harmony?
Yes, so we are able to rewire. It's not easy. It's the subject of all of my books and all of my free resources. And we can rewire in small steps, repeated often. And it's exactly like learning a foreign language in adulthood, which means on the one hand, it's like, yikes, it's that hard. I don't want to do that. But on the other hand, adults learn foreign languages every day. So you learned your native language through a lot of repetition, and that's how you learned your native emotions. And you don't remember the repetition, but if you spend time with a 2-year-old, you'll see how much they're working to wire in language. And that's how you wired in your emotional responses. So anyone who learns a foreign language, it's like, okay, I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do this. And each time it's a little easier. And a simple example, like I'm learning Spanish, I go to Mexico, I order this meal, and then the meal comes, and it's so exciting. Like I used my language and I got a reward. So creating small steps where you can apply your new strategy and get the reward.
Thank you. Janine's asked a question about meditation, something again we hear a lot of in the world of well-being and mental health. Why is meditation so good for us? What hormones or brain chemicals are involved there?
So the way I look at meditation is it frees you from just flowing into your old circuits. So we have two brains, the human cortex and the animal limbic system. And the human cortex has much less power than we think. It only has two skills. So one is abstracting, which means language and thinking about the future. And the other is to put on the brakes. So that's it. So your animal brain controls your body. So your animal brain says, hey, let's do this. And then human brain can say, yeah, it can put on the brakes, and then the animal brain has to come up with another plan. So meditation, if you don't do that, you just always go with whatever is your biggest pathway. Now, your biggest pathways were created by myelin, which is a substance that insulates neurons, which makes them superhighways. And we have a lot of myelin before age 8 and during puberty. So whatever our responses were in those years, that's where our electricity goes. And meditation helps you get out of them, but doesn't help you get into new ones. So repetition and creating a positive reward structure helps you create the new ones, and meditation helps you be willing to do that, but you got to do it so that the new patterns become established.
Very interesting. Yeah, I've always thought about meditation as a sort of bedrock skill for being able to be with things as they are, and that then allows you to start building additional positive habits on top. So that seems very consistent with what you said. Anna's asked a fascinating question about what foods, if any, are best to eat to optimize positive brain chemicals or supplements. Are there any kind of drugs or foods that also help support us in healthy brain chemicals?
So I know that the internet is full of these fast, easy, something you can put in your mouth is going to make you happy. So I'm very skeptical of the whole something you put in your mouth is going to make you happy. But I have to say that dopamine is made of protein. So don't be protein deficient. However, and also fat, we need fat to manufacture these chemicals. So don't be deficient. But then, of course, if you have too much protein or fat, then you're not going to make extra. So it's just you're making the stock of it that's available to be released in the appropriate situation, but you have to create the appropriate situation.
Thank you. Yasmin's asked a great question, which I think you've touched on already, but she's noting that if the brain's always focusing on satisfying unmet needs, like physical needs for food and shelter, which I think you've definitely said it is, does the brain also seek to meet unmet psychological needs in the same way?
Yes, so that's the idea that once your physical needs are met, then your brain focuses on social needs. So once you have enough food and warmth, then you look for social support and social importance.
Great. Could you say a little bit to something that Helen's asked here about the gut microbiome? We hear a lot about the millions of bacteria in our gut and how they are involved in things like neurotransmitters and brain chemicals or immune systems and so on. Is there some relationship between our gut and some of these brain chemicals that we've talked about?
So the link is that we have, of all of the serotonin in your body, 90% of it is in your gut and only 10%, but they're two separate systems. The serotonin in your cerebrospinal fluid doesn't pass the blood-brain barrier. The stuff in your gut doesn't pass the blood-brain barrier. So they're two separate systems. But I know that the internet is selling a lot of products, and if they work for anyone, I'm happy for you, that's great. But my focus is on creating the opportunities to give your inner mammal what it needs. And if you put all of your energy into chasing after the next product and neglecting these other things, to me, it's not the greatest, but it's also, I think, an effective distractor. Like I said, if you believe, oh, I'm going to just keep researching and every miracle cure. My husband and I, it's a joke because he researches supplements, I research supplements. We try, it's like, I don't know, so he takes his, I take mine. It's like, I don't know.
Thank you. There's another two questions I'd like to bring in together because I suspect they're related, but you might be able to put me right. First of all, somebody just said, I'm diagnosed, or I've been diagnosed with low dopamine, which causes my depression. Is there something except medication which I can do? So that's interesting. And then related to that, Mariangela has said, do positive psychology practices like gratitude and savoring and so on trigger these brain chemicals? To which I'm assuming there is some connection because we know that many of these practices do work. So I guess around depression, is there something other than medication which can help boost things like dopamine, but equally, maybe related, are these practices like gratitude and so on one way of doing that?
Okay, so I'm going to answer the second one first about savoring and gratitude. Okay, so our dopamine evolved to reward us for, I said, meeting the unmet need and for new and improved. And of course, you know, people could drive themselves crazy that way. But if you savor the same puppy every day, what I say is, you know, I could tape a rose to my nose, but it's not going to make me happy because I'm going to habituate and not notice it. So it really does take some new and improved. And I have a great example. My husband and I, we were going to this cloud forest, and it was a terrible transportation thing. It took us like 7 hours to get there. And a lot of the journey was like ugly. It was like, ooh, it's like a desert. And then when we got there, we were literally like in a cloud and in a rainbow, and there were rainbows all around us because they're created by the cloud, the mist. And it was so exciting. So that was cool, but like, you know, you said the journey, you know, we had to suffer the journey to get there. But did I move to that village in the mountains of Costa Rica so that I could live inside those rainbows every day? Well, no, I didn't. Like finding new exciting things is what our brain is designed to do. And I always say, if I worked in a coffee shop, I would stop noticing the smell of coffee, and that's how our brain works. Now, the other question about, well, my doctor says I have low this or that. This is the disease model, and I'm not allowed to give medical advice because I'll be sued. But just so you know that when they say that you have low something, they don't test it because they'd have to tap your spinal fluid to do that. And the only way they say they have low something is because you told them that you have low, the experience of not having it. But once you understand your inner mammal, then you understand why you're not activating it. And then you can do things that activate it, and also know that everyone has low chemicals, because as soon as you get the fruit, it stops releasing.
And Loretta, this is a fantastic bridge to the fact that you have some really brilliant, freely available resources, as well as your great book and upcoming book as well. So just to let you all know here that we're going to be sending out a follow-up email to everyone tomorrow with links to various ways you can follow this up, to find out more about Loretta's work, to look at some of the really practical actions we can take to generate more of these healthy, happy chemicals in our daily lives. I'm really grateful to everyone who's joined here this evening, and especially to those who made a donation to our Action for Happiness charity to be part of this and to allow us to keep putting on these great events, and all the work we do and our amazing volunteers do to reach out in communities all around the world. So thank you to everyone who's been part of that. And particular thanks, Loretta, for everything you've shared this evening. It's been really, really eye-opening for me, and I'm sure for others, but also really practical. And I really appreciate that, because this conversation could go down a very sort of sciencey route, and actually you've made it really day-to-day, really tangible. I wondered, is there any sort of final thought or summary you'd like to leave us with before we part today?
I always say in all my books, it's not easy being a mammal. So there is no simple one recipe. And I always say in all my books, nothing is wrong with you. Nothing is wrong with me. We're all mammals.
That's a nice note to end on. And thank you so much for being here. Thank you everyone for being part of this event. It's been lovely to connect with you all again and to learn and share all this stuff together. Thanks as always for your friendship and support in the chat. And Loretta, keep up the great work.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Take care.